Hi, Mathlin.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good.
Thanks for holding this session.
Oh, you're welcome. Do you have your coffee with you?
I do have my coffee, but like Sarah said, I've got kids in the background as well, so I'll be staying on mute.
No worries.
Thank you.
Okay, well, it's 9:02, so we'll go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody to the session today. Welcome you to We Got This, Conversations to Make Connections. It's a collaboration between the Zada Cooper Symposium Committee and the College of Pharmacy Genesis Board. My name is Barbara Kelly. I'm the Director of External Relations at the College of Pharmacy. Dr. Williams has been extremely involved, and we love having her on our committee because it brings just great collaborations and a different kind of thinking that helps us. This session is being recorded. We want to put it out for probably on YouTube as suggested. The topic for this conversation over coffee is building high performance working relationships, and is presented by Dr. Michelle Williams, Assistant Professor, Management and Entrepreneurship at the Tippie College of Business. Michelle, I'll let you take it over.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. And
oh, hold on.
Oh.
Sorry.
Oh, welcome. I'm really excited to be here again. No. And I really want to just get a sense for kind of who's in the room. So if you could just type in the chat, I want to know if where you're working from, if you're working from home, if you're in your office, if you're in Iowa City or another location. I'd love to kind of just get a sense for where everybody's coming from. But working from home, kids in the background, community pharmacy, home office, working from home. So a lot of people working from home. I have a class of 2020. Yay, congratulations. And working from home. So, okay. So a mix of people. So I'm going to share my slides, and I'm really excited to talk about building high performance work relationships during this time because you're probably under a reasonable amount of stress, and all the people that you're dealing with are under stress. Okay. So to make sure everybody can see the slides, give me a thumbs up. Yep, okay, excellent. So I want to thank the School of Pharmacy for inviting me here to participate in this conversation to make connections. I'm really excited to connect with you. I hope everybody has their coffee and we can get started. I'm also on social media, so if you want to tweet or connect with me later, I'm happy to connect with you. These are QVC codes, so you can use your phone to scan either my Twitter, which is Michelle Williams with a Z on Twitter, or my LinkedIn. Okay, so building high performance relationships at work, and this is really what leaders, followers, and team members need to know. So no matter what position you are in an organization, whether you're going into a new organization or you're leading a team, high-performing work relationships matter. It's particularly difficult right now. A lot of you said you're working from home, so you're leading a team from home, and you don't have those same touch points that you usually have. You can't just stop by their office or notice that they're frowning when they come in to work that day and stop by later to check in on them. So you're really more dependent on them to bring any issues that arise in their lives to work. I was talking to an individual who works in Des Moines and is working from home now, and she's the only person on her team with children. And so she was feeling very self-conscious when her child would get maybe a little fussy in the next room, and her manager was open enough and, kind of said, what's going, is there anything that I can help you with? And she said, I feel really self-conscious. And that gave her manager the opportunity to say, this is a changing world. There are going to be babies crying and dogs walking by and significant others who walking past your screen. And as a team, we're all going to be open to that and, know that everyone's still committed and getting their work done. So particularly today, and I just want to say, I'm going to share slides for about 30 minutes, but then I'd really like to open it up for discussion. And what I want to talk about today is really when external stressors exist, how can you build and maintain trust within your firm? So a lot of people have had high touch, strong relationships going into working at home. But a lot of the skills that you've used previously really were face-to-face skills, right? So that you were really using your intuition and your emotional intelligence to kind of sense how people were feeling and jump in when you needed. And now you're trying to do that long distance. So we're going to talk about how to build collaborative work relationships with diverse and virtual colleagues, how to understand and avoid threats to collaboration, and how to maintain trust while making tough decisions. So you may be making these decisions right now. There are decisions about who to bring back to work and how to make sure people are safe and at distances. There are a lot of people in the pharmacy field who are integrating very new kinds of workers into their team. So CVS Health, for instance, has hired 50,000 people. They are making a priority of hiring people from their business partners who were furloughed. So Marriott and Hilton. So people are coming from a very different industry into healthcare. Scandinavian Air has been retraining its flight attendants to work in nursing homes and healthcare situations. So it's not that so one of the things that people are going to be doing in pharmacy is not only working with colleagues who have the same background and training they have, but people who are coming from other industries now that healthcare needs more manpower. So I'd like to take a minute to explore kind of your experience during the pandemic, theories and frameworks related to building and maintaining trust, but more importantly, how these frameworks can help with the real life challenges you may be facing working in your workplace. So I'm going to start with trust. And whenever I talk about relationships, my research area is trust and collaboration. And I think trust is really a foundation that everyone would agree needs to be there. It's kind of hard. It's a fuzzy concept though. People say, I know, you know it when you see it, and you know it when you don't have it. But how do you actually engage in behaviors to make sure you can fortify that, especially, and understand what are the special challenges to trust in a situation where people are under stress? So trust is key because it does things that you've all experienced. It increases information sharing, helping behavior, responsiveness, flexibility. So it increases all the things you actually need during a crisis or during a pandemic. You need people to be sharing all the information they can, even if that information is embarrassing to them or may not put them in the best light. Anything that they've experienced, any mistake that they've made, that may help other people not make that mistake. So you need to know that they trust your team enough to reveal that. Trust also decreases the need to monitor others. Essential right now. You can't monitor people all the time unless you have really high-tech skills. You're not taking over their camera and watching what they're doing when they're not online with you. So it's a situation where managers who may have not had the strongest relationship with their employees are also forced to take that leap of faith, to trust them, and to develop the relationship from a new foundation. Trust decreases defensive behavior. So when you ask somebody, oh, well, were you really working? What are you doing? People aren't going to respond as if you're accusing them. They're going to respond with more openness, that you really want to know, is there something, are you asking I was talking with a nurse, and she was giving a handoff to another nurse, and she said that nurse kept asking me a lot of questions, and I kept thinking, does she really want to know, or is she just trying to trip me up, right? So trust gives you that answer. That person really wants to know. They're asking the question because they don't understand something, not because they're trying to trip you up. It also it reduces avoidance and withdrawal. Now, when you're in your office building, or if you're, in your pharmacy and everybody's there, when somebody's avoiding you, right? Because they stop going to lunch with you. They, they don't joke around. There's signals that you can pick up on. When they're working from home, it's much harder, right? Did they not answer your email because they're avoiding you, or did they not answer your email because they're really busy, right? And so you want trust there to be able to give you the space to realize that, yes, they will respond to me when they can. They're doing the essential work that they need to be doing. So what do I mean by trust? I said it before, it's fuzzy. But let's think of trust as the willingness to rely on someone when they might have the opportunity to harm you, right? So every worker on your team has the opportunity to go out for a walk instead of doing the work they promised to do for you, right? So you have to trust them. So there's the risk of opportunism, but you have a positive expectation. You believe that that person will act in a way that's helpful, or at least not harmful, and you believe in the other's benevolence, integrity, and competence. So those are the three keys. And when I talk about trust during a more stable time, and we talk about benevolence and integrity and competence, everybody says, I just want the high ability worker. That's all I care about. They may not be very likable, maybe they're a little sketchy, but as long as they have high ability, that's the person I want to hire. In a crisis situation, it's different, right? In a crisis situation, suddenly benevolence rises to the top. You want someone who is going to act in your best interest when they're not there. They're going to take steps to take care of your best interest, to take care of your safety when whether you can see them or not. So Henry Ward is the CEO of Carta, and he had to lay off a lot of people. And in a statement that he wrote on LinkedIn, one of the things he said is, I am the CEO, I'm taking responsibility. This is not your manager. Your managers fought for you. These are the bottom line. So I really care about you. This is not something I want to do. And he said that he not only made this announcement to his employees, but he set it out there on LinkedIn as a model for people to use to really understand that it's important to not only care about your employees who you may have to furlough, but also to protect your people who are there, to make sure that people know that their managers are not, care about them and are protecting them. Unfortunately, during these types of stressful times, we have trust can deteriorate, and for reasons that are not related to the individual, in a sense, that fear and stress can undermine rational cooperation, right? So you can think people are trying to trip you up. You can start to have a more narrow view, a less forgiving view. Employees can start avoiding one another. You can get angry at small things that happen. And vengeful behavior can override understanding and forgiveness. There's a famous book by Axelrod called The Evolution of Cooperation. And you've probably heard of this idea of tit for tat, that, if someone does something good for you, you do something good to them. If they do something bad to you, you give them retribution. But what they found in studies is that in an uncertain situation, there should always be a tit for two tats, right? So if someone does something wrong or there's a glitch in your relationship, the first step should be to continue cooperation and figuring that out. One of the things, I'm gonna blank this for a minute, one of the things that I talk about a lot when I'm talking to organizations and to people is this idea that I call the myth of trustworthiness. And the myth as I explain it, is that when we think that we are trustworthy when we meet everybody else's expectations without any flaws. So we have ability, we have integrity, we have honesty, and we're always meeting their expectations. And if we don't always meet their expectations, then we're not really trustworthy. And we also think that about others, that, right, if they're not meeting our expectations, they're not really trustworthy. And my reason why I say this is a myth is because people, and I say this, it's kind of for a shock factor, people just aren't trustworthy, right? And not in the sense that they don't care about you and they don't try to live up to standards, but the sense that there are always glitches. And when we get into a crisis and we get into a pandemic, we see the situation more, right? There are glitches in our relationships, there are misunderstandings in healthcare, right? Almost 70% of adverse events are related to miscommunications, right? So trust is not necessarily simply that everybody behaves perfectly. Trust is built and maintained on how do we deal with those situations when people aren't acting perfectly. Do we come back? Do we have a conversation? Do we try to understand it? Do we rebuild? And so this is a time in our lives when, especially working virtually, there's a lot of potential for misunderstanding, and understanding trust is something that we are co-creating and we're kind of stumbling through, right? If you think about other people in your life, if you think about your manager, you think about a partner or a spouse or your children, they don't act perfectly, right? There are times when they don't meet your expectations. There are times probably when you're angry with them, but you don't walk out the door. You sit there and you have a conversation and you maintain the trust. And the trust is stronger because of the actions you take when those glitches occur. Okay, so we know that there are going to be these glitches. What happens when you add another element? You're working across boundaries, right? So if you're in pharmacy, you're working with doctors and nurses and departments and administrators at your hospital, and there are boundaries there, right? There are boundaries in terms of profession, in terms of departments, and that leads to interpretive uncertainty, right? So you don't really know why people are asking for what they're asking for, why they might be making certain accusations. Those relationships can trigger tension and bias and fear. And those, you may think of that when I say that, well, you know, my relationships with my organization don't have fear. They may not, but they have tension, and they have people with higher and lower status. I've worked a lot in healthcare. I did research studies at Mass General Hospital in Boston. My first job was at Children's Hospital of Newark. So working on interdisciplinary healthcare teams is something that actually brought me to looking at broader business concepts. And there are definitely a lot of tensions. I always tell people the story that when I was an undergrad at Johns Hopkins, I had an internship where I sat in on medical teams. And I was so excited because I was a psychology undergraduate. And I thought, now I'll really see how teams work together. And I had never seen so much conflict in my life. And it dawned on me that there is not one person in this room that doesn't want the patient to get better. Yet their approaches are different and the knowledge they have is different. The nurse knows how the patient is responding on a day-to-day basis. The doctor has codified knowledge and a large set of patients that they've been dealing with. So there's all different things going on there. And there, in the healthcare in particular, there's a lot of power differences, right? So there is a hierarchy in a hospital, no matter how much people are trying to work more and more collaboratively, that still exists. So how do we have to jump in here? I would argue that emotion work is one of the things that is critical to your job as an employee, as a collaborator in healthcare, and any kind of knowledge work, but it's something that isn't talked about, right? People aren't saying to you, well, you know, yes, you have to do your job. And then there, on top of that, to build these strong relationships, you have to understand and care about how other people are feeling, and especially during crisis, when those feelings may be interrupting their ability to work with you. So in an uncertain, knowledge-intense, kind of patient-centered, focused economy, emotion work is invisible, it's non-routine, it's not mandated, it's not easily observed, and it's harder or impossible to monitor. Right? You can choose to be nice or you can choose not to. And so there are situations where you see a lot of care and compassion, for instance, a nurse working with her patients. And then there's places where you see less compassion. I did a study where I measured perspective taking and kind of understood how much effort people put into understanding others. And I asked them about how much and this is a healthcare center, how much they did this with patients. The numbers were off the charts. Everybody was spending a lot of time trying to understand the emotions and the concerns of their patients. Then I asked them, how much do you do it with your colleagues in your same function or profession? And the number went down. Then I asked, how much do you do it with the people who are higher status in your organization? The number went down further. And to make an organization work, right, you have to be doing this up, down, and across your organization. And uncertainty makes it harder, right? As uncertainty and collaborative work, become increasingly prevalent, the need for managing colleagues' negative emotions becomes integral. The need for managers to have that as part of their skill set. When we look at CEOs saying, what's the future of work? What do our new employees need to have? You'll notice that interpersonal skills and collaborative skills are high on the list, but people don't talk specifically about trust. So before I go on, I'd just like to take a moment to see if there's any questions, and to get, if you want to unmute yourself, if there's any stories you have about how the current work environment has influenced your work with your colleagues. Or do you see more emotions in the workplace? Up here to.
Okay, my name is Erica Ernst. I'll jump in.
Hi,
I really appreciate your insights. I think that emotion in the workplace is a really challenging aspect for me. I find sometimes when I express my passion, it's misinterpreted, and that then is harder for me to overcome. Whether it's so I'll leave it there. Maybe I could have some others chime in about how they have found being able to express their either emotion or passion in the workplace can sometimes be taken by others in a negative sense, and it can be a challenge to communicate even in the face-to-face environment. And I think it's even more challenging now when we're on this virtual environment.
Yeah, I think that Erica, is a really important point. And they're also, not only can people misinterpret your emotions because they're interpreting them through the lens of their past experience, there are also gender differences in the interpretation of emotion. Studies have found that for instance, when men express anger, there's an assumption of the people around them that anger is justified, that there's something in their environment that's creating that they should be angry at. And often when women express their passion or their anger at something that's going on in the workplace, it's taken as a personal emotion as opposed to an emotion that's necessitates change in the workplace. So that can be an additional layer in expressing emotion. And I think that we don't have a lot of experience in the workplace in making emotional expression the norm, right? So especially with expressions, for instance, of anger, organizations often want everyone to suppress it. Don't express that you're angry. Stress might be okay, but definitely not anger, because they take that as negative emotion, and they forget that every change that's probably been made in any organization has been made because someone got angry about the way things were done, right? Things were not, there was a job to be done, and it was not being done in an efficient way, or was not being done at the service of the people in the organization. And people have made anger is the source of innovation. It also is the source of innovation, right? It's a source of innovation and change. And being able to sometimes reframing that for people and having them think different about, I'm passionate about this because this is a change that I see that we can make and needs to happen in the organization. So I think I really appreciate your bringing that point to us. Does anyone else want to add something? Okay, so I'm gonna move on a little and talk about what I call the foundations of interpersonal work. And there's two of them. One is emotional influence, which I've kind of touched upon, and the other is perspective taking. So let me talk about emotional influence. Emotional influence is an emotional intelligence skill, but it's not one that you either have or you don't have. It's one that you develop with practice and that you're already using today. You probably don't even recognize it. So one thing you can do is alter the situation. So for instance, your employees are very stressed, or you have a colleague who's very stressed, and you can alter the situation by moving someone around, right? So you have people who have less work during the pandemic and people have more work during the pandemic, and by moving them around, you change the situation that they're in, right? You can change the situation for a patient, for instance, by changing the room or the floor they're in, the amount of nursing time they get. You can alter others' attention. This is something that people often do without even recognizing it, right? So people come in, they're in a bad mood, and you make a joke, you lighten the mood, you do something that allows them to not focus on their thing they're upset about. And altering attention is probably it's probably gone up in use now during the pandemic, right? Because there's nothing you can do about the fact that stores are closed and you're homeschooling your children and all of these things are going on, but you can focus on things that you're going to do later, or skills that you're developing, right? You're developing these huge set of technical skills about collaborating virtually and working with Zoom that you may have not had the opportunity to develop otherwise. You may have time to be helpful to volunteer organizations in a way that you haven't been before, or take online courses. You can also, the one that I think is most relevant in a lot of work situations is altering the interpretation of events, right? So that people can think about what's happened differently, right? So when things go wrong, you can think, this is all horrible. I shouldn't even be in this profession, right? People sometimes go there when they're in a stress situation, but being able to talk to, especially new people coming in, right? So there are new nurses on our field, there are new pharmacists, to be able to say, everybody in this role makes that mistake at some point. And that's a part of the learning process. It's not saying that this isn't the right profession for you. So all different ways of interpreting that no one's been a manager of a whole team that's all virtual, suddenly switched in 2 days, right? That without any planning. That's the first time you're doing it. You may be going online, you may be, we have someone graduating, you may suddenly be taking all your courses online, never having taken an online course before. And altering people's, being able to reinterpret what their expectation should be. And also what people's expectations should be for themselves. I think people are feeling like less competent workers sometimes because they're in the middle of the meeting and they have their child chasing the dog behind them, or bringing the math book and saying, can you help me with this fraction problem or this trigonometry problem? And you're kind of trying to wave them away and pretend that you're totally focused the same way you are in your office. as opposed to being able to reinterpret that. Now you're integrating more, right? So you're able to be your ability to integrate your life and your work may be allowing you to not burn out during this period, right? So it may be that you're in here for the long haul, etc. You can alter people's physiology. Sports is great and positive. Alcohol is also one. I just read this morning that the sales of alcohol have gone up 50% over the month last year in the US and 40% in Britain, because I guess they like to drink at the pubs more. But definitely there's a lot of emotional influence in that way going on right now, hopefully after work hours. And altering emotional display. And this is the thing that's gone on in organizations traditionally. People saying, just suck it up. Look, everybody else, you're not the only one in the pandemic, or, everyone has mean customers or mean clients, just forget about it. And when we do the research, that is the only one of the emotion regulation strategies that has an incredibly negative effect, not only on your relationship with the person who's saying suck it up, right? But also on then your kind of resources to be helpful in your organization and your satisfaction with your job. Threat reducing emotional influence is kind of really what we're talking about mostly in this kind of pandemic situation. Is how can you have a intentional plan to make sure that other people don't think, right, that you're trying to check up with them, or that you're trying to get your job done at the expense of them succeeding. And how do you do that? And it's the same set of strategies of reframing things, but doing it more proactively, right? So sometimes when you're collaborating or putting into a position with a new set of people, they may have fears about interacting with you. You're now probably being asked to collaborate across different boundaries with different groups of people, that different professions than you have before. Integration between acute care and nursing is closer than it's ever been, with patients going back and forth, and being able to make sure that those handoffs go well and people aren't feeling that nurses in the hospital have more status than nurses in a nursing home, and have those types of differences and fears of someone finding out someone else's error make collaboration more difficult. What studies have found in kind of trying to do this threat reducing influence is that not only does it reduce negative emotion in the person that you're dealing with, it increases their positive emotion. And even more importantly, it demonstrates social competencies that are critical for trustworthy behavior. It shows that you care. So the effort, even if you try to reduce someone's emotion and you get it wrong and they don't feel so much better, the fact that you reached out, the fact that you took the time to show concern for them is necessary for trustworthiness. People then believe that you're not the kind of person who would take advantage of them. So engaging in these behaviors, people tend to feel bad if you try to make someone feel better, or you tell a joke and you have like failed humor, it goes the wrong way, or people don't understand that you're trying to be helpful, or don't take it in the way that you expected, or it's not as successful. That attempt is still important in building the relationship. So this is kind of what I talked about a little before, how these different influence strategies help people's relationships. So changing the situation has a very positive effect on the relationship. Changing how people think has very positive effect. Those are the blue lines. And telling people to suck it up and just not show their emotions has that negative effect. So when you're bringing your passion or your emotion to work, and people are saying, that's taking it the wrong way, or saying that's not appropriate here, what it's doing is not addressing what the root cause of the emotion is or not the passion and where you want to go forward, but it also decreases people's job satisfaction. And so as a leader, one of the things we found in the study, which is really interesting, was a study with Laura Little and Janaki Guti, is that people expect their leaders to manage their emotions. It's not just, it's nice if you do it. They're actually expecting that when negative interactions with customers and patients come up in their daily life, that leaders are aware and taking action. And when people are working at home, there are interactions that they're having over email or over the phone that you're not aware of. So making that open space for people and you're on your team to talk about these and bring these to your attention and have the whole team deal with them is very important. Okay, I'm just going to talk about one more thing before we kind of open it up to questions. So the thing that undergirds or underlies the ability to help people influence their emotion is kind of knowing where people are at that point, right? What are they thinking about what's going on? And people talk about perspective taking, which is imagining a situation from another person's point of view. And that sounds all well and good, but people are terrible at perspective taking, right? So you don't know what's going on in someone else's mind. Even someone you've lived with, lived with for 10 years, you don't know, right? So if you go back to your parents, you lived with them, for 18 years before you left the house. If they ask the 18-year-old what their parents are thinking, they don't know. And the same in the other direction. But people are able to use that imagination, imagining how the other person's feeling, as a jumping off base for what I call perspective analysis. So then you figure out what they might be thinking, and then you ask them about it. You listen to what they're saying. You try to take an action, and you see if they react in an unexpected way. You're like, oh, I got it wrong. And it's an iterative process. And but even just trying and engaging in that helps you over time understand other people's expectations, appreciate their interests, and know how to mitigate their harm. So you can't be benevolent, you can't help people with their feelings, you can't reduce the harm to them if you don't know what they think is harmful. One of the kind of perks of this is, even though perspective taking itself, that imagining part is not effective, when you make an actual concerted effort to engage in it more, it increases managers' ratings of people, how your managers see you as trustworthy, someone who's not going to take advantage of them. It's related to leadership capabilities. So perspective taking is one of those kind of hidden variables that leads to people being able to have better vision and more credibility. And managers rate them as higher performers. So, okay, this is it. We're gonna kind of wind down and open up for questions. If you have questions, just put them in the chat. The key to all of these behaviors is really practice, practice, practice. Unfortunately, we're already in the stressful situation, so we have to practice under stress, but being able to practice in low risk situations, like with your colleague, before you do it with your boss, things like that, because perspective taking decreases when people are under stress, or pressed for time, or trying to multitask. So that's exactly what every single person is doing right now during this crisis. So being more kind of open and forgiving of failures in perspective taking, and asking more questions and listening more, because it's harder, it's a much harder process for people to take back and slow down a little to engage in the perspective taking and the emotion management that maintains that relationship that you need in collaboration. So key takeaways, building high-performing collaborative work relationships requires effort, right? So I'm sure everyone here knows that relationships don't just maintain themselves, but no, they require even more effort because you're doing it virtually. It can't just happen when you happen to go at a lunch, or you meet the person at the vending machine, or you see them at the water fountain or the coffee maker. Now you actually have to reach out, and you have to encourage them to reach out to you. You want to engage in that perspective taking, but that analysis and listening and know that people actually are more open than you might think to having you influence their emotions. So you might think, well, they'll just, it's their own issue, they'll take care of it themselves. But if you can reframe something for someone, if you've been through that experience before, those things really are appreciated by people. You want to engage in perspective analysis, really see how they're thinking, because you can help them better if you know how they're thinking and you're listening. And the last point that I want to put down that I haven't put in at all yet is don't forget self-care. I've just listed a bunch of things that actually take effort and work, and emotional work is work. It's something that you need to replenish yourself from, whether you're taking walks or chatting with friends, having a virtual happy hour with some of that wine you've bought to increase to help the liquor stores be more profitable, or the nice local wineries. Don't forget to take care of yourself, because you can't, it's putting on your own oxygen mask before helping others. Without doing that, you can burn out from all of this emotional work that really is, ironically, even more foundational as we're working virtually and not being able to see people in person. So you can build and maintain the trust you need within your team. You can definitely do it. And that's all I have for today. I'd like to open it up to questions, and definitely please feel free to contact me either by phone or by social media. I'll let you take a picture of that page, and then I'm going to stop sharing so we can just chat.
Michelle, Melissa Corrigan has asked in the chat, will you talk about reading emotion while we are wearing masks out in the community, or PPE in the work setting?
Yeah, so it makes it even more difficult than using something like Zoom. So Melissa, that's a great question. So what your communication is being changed to is similar to a phone conversation, right? So all you can see is their eyes. So you have a little more information, you have a little more nonverbal in their body language and maybe their eyes, but the cues that we're used to using in their facial expression, their smile, are covered. And so it requires more listening and more asking. So in that kind of perspective, you can see, because there's more, you're going to need to ask more questions, listen more deeply. One of the things that you might notice if you go out and you're in the workplace and you're wearing your protective gear, as Americans in general, we're not really very good at listening. We tend to talk, we tend to want to jump in with answers before we even listen fully to the problem. And hopefully one of the things that having less cues can do, having less cues we can use when having less cues, is really upping our listening and our reflecting back to people what they're saying, and making sure that we're checking in, that we're understanding. And that would be helpful. Even once we take the masks off, that will be very helpful.
Dr. Williams,
Yeah.
I got a question for you, or maybe it's really a question posed to everyone. I know many of you on the call are pretty familiar with the organization I work with, and we had a pretty trying time within our organization, just from a staff perspective. Right before COVID happened, we lost two employees, one tragically, the other to a new position. And for us, I think the transition to remote work has been not without its struggles, but I think what we've done really well is we have basically 4 days a week, we have team calls, and we really open each call up with what we just generically refer to as a daily dose. And we use it as everybody goes around and talks either a daily dose of gratitude or fresh air or a success that they've had that day, trying to be like a means to kind of replace that water cooler talk that you so want during a normal work day when you see each other. And then we use our Wednesdays, we call them our one-on-one Wednesdays. So somebody has to reach out to somebody else on your team on an individual basis regarding if it's just personal outreach or if it's just a work-related question. But just want to throw that out and see if others, I really like all your points you're bringing, because I do think, you know, for us, we want to continue to have that meaningful emotional connection while we're all going through quite still, I think. If anything, I think now as the pandemic continues, we're getting even more stressed by still not working back together, or even the stress of thinking about going back to work together. So I don't know, I throw that out as some of the things that I've seen that I think has worked well, and maybe either your reactions or if others have other ideas, would love to brainstorm together.
Yeah, so I'd love to open it to others. What I particularly love about what you're saying is that you formalized it. So it's not just you share gratitude or you share, you know, something, a success when it hits you. You're making it part of the routine so that people have to reflect back on it. And share gratitude is one of the biggest, most successful things in not only raising people's immune systems, but having a positive effect on mental health. So gratitude and I think and helping others are up there. The other one is journaling. So having times when people reach out individually. I've also heard of organizations that use Microsoft Teams, and they just leave it on all day when they're at work, so people can ping each other in the same way they would drop by their office. They can just, you know, go like, "Hey, how you doing?" Or, you know, "Squirrel just ran by my window," or "My, you know, my dog just did this or that." So there's those little kinds of things you miss.
Yeah, we were talking about turning them on during lunch because, you know, you sit together and eat lunch normally at work, and you just don't get that anymore. You're everybody's eating lunch on their own, and you miss that type of interaction with people.
Yes, definitely. In my department, we have Monday lunches. So we
Right.
sit together and just talk about nothing. What are some other people doing with their organizations? Or things you think you might try?
I can tell you what we're doing in the Office of Professional Education. Our manager has weekly meetings, and we spend the first part of those meetings just talking about how we're feeling. And I think that's important now during this distancing and the pandemic, to be sort of radically honest of how we're feeling. Of we shouldn't be saying you know, how are you? Fine, when we don't feel fine inside. And just having that time to sort of expose those fears. And, you know, we also go over things that have given us some positivity. We look at the good things too. But I think it's important to get that out and to build that trust within that group, to have those emotions and get them off of our chests and off of our shoulders, so they're not lurking right here behind us. An example that I went through is I didn't like how I felt the first time I went into Hy-Vee during the lockdown. I mean, I felt very strange, and it was important for me to communicate that with friends. And so that sort of dialogue, I think, is important during this time, and it's been very helpful. I think the other thing our manager did for us is gave us permission to take vacation during this time. For me, at the beginning of this, it was unclear how to navigate the day, because Leslie, like you, I prefer working later into the evening rather than early in the morning. So I totally get that. And I didn't know it's at first of like, oh, what happens if I throw a load of laundry in at 10:30 a.m.? Am I breaking the rules? Am I, you know, and obviously it's a whole new normal that I had to get in my head personally. And by having those discussions as part of that team, I think she really led us into a place where we felt good about that, and we felt the trust being established. So that's one of the things we do, and I think it works well. Thank you, Dr. Williams, for your good information today and useful information. It's very interesting. I think this is also a time to not have unspoken expectations. So that's sort of what derails that trust too, of if they're not clearly communicated, it sets up that scenario of I'm not sure what the expectations are. And I feel like our team has done a great job with that. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh, you're welcome. And thanks for sharing that. That's really important. I think there's two pieces that you said that are critical. One is having these more full life discussions, right? So it's not just everything's about work. And that letting people bring their full selves to work is critical right now, because what might be stressing you may have nothing to do with your work situation, but it's still going to affect your relationships with other people and how you show up. And once you actually share it, people can be more sympathetic, and that you can work through that. And it doesn't feel the same. Once you share it, you know, like you said, the strangeness of going to Hy-Vee, then it doesn't weigh on you, right? It's not affecting your workday in the same way. And the second is what you mentioned about the clarity of policies. So we're doing me and some colleagues on the East Coast are doing a study during COVID. We've just collected the second wave of data, and that policy clarity for working at home has a huge effect on trust and how emotionally exhausted people feel. So kind of knowing what to do, they're not spending so much time figuring out, is this okay? Is this right? Is this what you expect from me? And I think that as a online instructor, actually clarifying everything when you're not in person is pretty amazing, to realize how much clarification things need. We just have like Zoom rooms where I have people like talk about the assignment, and then we come in and visit at each room and see your questions. And there are more questions than you would think. And I think there are questions that people, when they were in person, they might have not even felt comfortable asking. So if you create a forum here virtually, you'll get questions and concerns brought up that will likely help you as you transition back into working in the workplace, because now you have this foundation of communicating more openly and asking and having that safety to ask.
I might ask a question about somebody who doesn't really want to share. Maybe he or she's an introvert and on your team. Is there just advice on what you might do to encourage them to share, or just kind of let them be?
So that's a really interesting question, because if you have a set of introverts and extroverts, the extroverts are going to talk first, and the introverts may be able to kind of get by without saying anything. But it turns out that when people don't share as much, they're less trusted, right? Because people don't know, they make assumptions for why that person's not sharing. So I think as a manager, one of the things that do is talk to that person offline and have them frame that for everybody. You know, I'm probably only going to share once a week because I'm really introverted, or I'm really a private person, but here's what I'm happy to share about, right? So I'm not happy to share about my kids because that makes me feel uncomfortable, but maybe I'll share about my dog or something I've cooked this week, and people figuring out what is it that they could share that allows people to connect to them. And then also frame that I'm not going to be sharing as much as everybody because I'm introverted. And then people accept and they know why that person's not sharing. It's not that they don't like the team or something like that.
Thank you. Perfect.
Good morning, Dr. Williams. My name's Kelly Jo. I'm a student pharmacist, member of the class of 2020. Thank you so much. I would really appreciate any advice that you might have on how we can, you talked about expectations and how we need to change expectations for ourselves. We need to change expectations for others. How can we find that balance of giving ourselves and others grace with expectations, but also like meeting these necessary kind of productivity markers? I know I'm so behind on that now complex study schedule that I created for myself. And I'm trying to find ways to not get frustrated that I'm not meeting those goals for myself. So I would love to hear any advice that you may have on that, please and thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. That is a great point. One of the things I often think about is kind of flipping those roles, right? When you're not making your own productivity goals, you get really down on yourself. But if a friend came to you and said, wow, I've made these goals and I haven't met them, what would you say to them? Right? You'd say, that's okay. Why don't you revise those goals? They were probably too ambitious. How people work through a pandemic and with all this stress is very different. So kind of step back and think of yourself as your friend. It's so much easier to be compassionate to others than it is to ourselves. Or call up a friend, Zoom them and role play. Say, okay, this is my situation. You be me. I'm going to be, I'm going to play, you play me and I'm going to play you. And what would I say, right? And having that different story in your mind of what it means to be productive during a pandemic can help you not only gauge yourself, but also show that same compassion to other people. I think we're so much more understanding of others than we are of ourselves. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge of something like that is, flipping that switch so that we're as compassionate and show ourselves as much grace as we do others.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just said, Kelly Jo, I didn't stick to my study schedule and there was no pandemic. Take it one step and day at a time.
Perfect. See, she's reframing that for you.
And Leslie mentioned, I like how you had us put answer in chat instead of speaking. Introverts usually will participate then.
Thanks, Leslie.
Michelle, this is Melissa. I want to thank you, for joining us today. And we've reflected in these sessions this week about Zada and her, what she did in her lifetime and kind of the historical perspective. And one of the things that was so important to her was collaboration. And you touched on that today. And, we're so happy that the College of Pharmacy is collaborating with the Tippie College of Business through different Zada sessions, but also through our healthcare leadership program. And I just, really sincerely want to say thank you. The richness that you've brought to our session today and to serving on the planning committee. And we hope for more future interaction. But I just want to draw it back that Zada, really did that in the early, in 1910, 1920, 1930s, as she looked at what organizations can we work with that are different, that can bring some innovation, and how can we approach challenges and opportunities in different ways. So I really appreciate that you're with us today.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you so much. I really appreciate being invited. And I have loved every moment of working with the College of Pharmacy. You're a great organization.
Maybe have one more time for one more comment or one more question, if anybody has any.
I do want to say that yesterday, Dean Latender mentioned that he was not able to join on the call, but he wanted to extend sincere gratitude to you, Michelle, and to everybody who has participated on the call today. He wishes he could be here, but he had another meeting to go to.
Oh, tell him thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And thank you all for attending. I really appreciate you hopping on at 9 in the morning and putting off your to-do list for an hour to have this conversation. It's always very enlightening to me that you always learn as much from your participants as they do from you. And I love that we were co-learners together today.
Any more comments or questions for Dr. Williams or the group?
I'd like to say thank you to all the students that showed up this morning too.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Well, thank you
10
all.
o'clock.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Dr. Williams, great job.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're
Have
welcome.
a great day, everyone.
Yes, enjoy your day.